Hi, my name's Keith, and in this video we're going to talk about the Kundalini system. So this is part of a series of videos about the energy field anatomy, and in the last video we talked about the torus. And if you remember, the torus is the unity level of our energy field. So in this video we'll discuss polarity, and the Kundalini is that development from unity to polarity. So we'll go into the core structures of the Kundalini, some of the iconography, the mythology related to it. We'll also talk about what it might mean to have a Kundalini awakening, or what kind of models there are for that, some tips for developing your Kundalini, and kind of some of the circumstances in which the Kundalini can be problematic for people as well. So we'll cover a lot of ground, but before we do, let's just get a basic sense of what it is through this analogy. And that is, imagine a building with a lot of floors and an elevator. Now the Kundalini is the elevator and the shaft of the elevator, and then the different floors would be the chakra system. So you see, the Kundalini and the idea of developing or awakening the Kundalini is the process by which one accesses consciously more and more of the levels that the chakra system has as floors. So hopefully this will become more clear as we move along in the video. Now on to the core structure of the Kundalini. So I'm going to call it a Kundalini system, and the reason is because there are a number of components. So there's the center of the donut hole, and if you remember from the last video about the torus looks like a donut, and then it has the hole in the center of the donut. Now that central hole is a vertical axis, and this is the equivalent of what is known as the Sushumna in the yogic tradition. But it is the central channel of the energy field, and everything spins and swirls around that, but there is access to stability, coherency, and centeredness right in the center. Now in the physical body, that's the equivalent of the spine. But with the Kundalini system, we have the central channel, which, as I mentioned, was known as the Sushumna. In the yogic tradition, it's known as the Chong, or the penetrating vessel in the Taoist tradition. But it has other components. Now, there are two different currents, two different flows that move along that central channel. And one of them goes from the bottom up, and the other goes from the top down. Now, these are the yin and the yang. These are the Ida and the Pingala, and they're depicted in different cultures, in different mythology, in different ways, and they're often said to be the archetypes of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. It's very, very clean and simple in the Taoist tradition when we just say yin and yang. In a sense, it means kind of the in and the out, but it also actually has to do with how our field is rotating. When we look at the energy field dynamics, you have centrifugal and centripetal forces. One spins to center, one spins out to the periphery. So it also relates to that on an electrical level. So speaking about the Kundalini system in terms of electricity is probably more of like the modern language when trying to understand it better. You see, the Kundalini system is a very, very basic electrical circuit, an electromagnetic circuit. So an electrical circuit is set up by having a positive pole and a negative pole, and then there's the neutral, in which the charge distribution is neutralized in center. Now in our system, that is at the center of the entire energy field, the center of the center, and that's in the middle of the heart chakra. And I'm not going to talk about that in this video, but that's the neutral spot in one's Kundalini system. But as you move up and down all along the central channel, that positive charge, which descends from the top of the body, and that negative charge, which ascends from the bottom of the body, are coiling or spinning and spiraling around the central channel. And every time they cross, there is a chakra. So they have a natural structure. And the amazing thing is, we're still existing in the modern world with iconography that depicts this in very, very mainstream features, such as the caduceus, which is from Egyptian times, but it somehow has found its way into Western medicine. Now, the Taoist tradition shows it more as the governing vessel and the conception vessel. Now these are what run along the back and the front of the body, and in a sense it runs the track of the very back of the spine, and then it runs the front of the body kind of where the endocrine system is lined up down the midline in the front. But at the same time, there's a beautiful depiction in the Taoist tradition in the yin-yang symbol. Now think of what the yin-yang symbol looks like. It's a sphere, it's a circle, and it's a cross-section of that. And then what's happening is there's an interaction within unity of two waves or two aspects. And those two aspects are kind of hugging, kissing, and coiling into one another. And yet, even though they're both connected to one another and nested perfectly, they even have a component of the other inside of them. So it speaks to the energy dynamics at the level of the Kundalini, where duality is nested inside of unity, and then even within the individuation of each component of duality, it still has its counterpart. So let's take a look at some maps about what it might be that's happening when people say that they've had a Kundalini awakening, or at least what are the classical ways to understand it. So the yogic tradition provides us a really good map, and that is through these structures that are called the Granthis. So the Granthis are called psychic knots, and there are 3 of them in your system. One is at the root, one is at the heart chakra, and one is in the center of the head. And so it's said that if these 3 objects, these 3 veils of consciousness or obstructions, if the 3 of them are burnt out through the inner fire, through the tapas, then the Kundalini channel can be open and fluid. Now, I've had a lot of experience with transformations in the Kundalini system, and I can attest to the existence of these 3 structures and their significance. Now, why it is that they're placed in those 3 locations is another question. Now, one thing, a simple explanation, may simply be that the root has to do with the physical body and the connection to the earth, and the heart is the connection into the neutral point or the balance point in the overall system, and of course it's the center. And then you have the point in the center of the head, and that is where the seat of our consciousness is generally sitting. You know, we perceive ourselves as generally existing in the center of our head. And so the lower part may be the body, the upper part may be the mind, and the middle is the thing which counterbalances between them. And that's just a basic schematic of why it might be that the Granthis sit in those 3 spots. But here's another model that relates in a sense to that, but comes from more of a physiological, a biophysiological aspect. And that is understanding what's going on with the Kundalini system in relationship to the cerebral spinal fluid, the nervous system, and what's sometimes referred to as the craniosacral system. So there is a modality that's called craniosacral therapy or balancing or biodynamic craniosacral work. But basically, and I have a lot of experience with it, but in essence, what a craniosacral therapist is doing is they're learning how to track and feel the undulations of the nervous system and the cerebral spinal fluid at the physical body, and then how that connects to more subtle energetic processes that become increasingly non-physical. So there are different traditions within craniosacral therapy that have different focus, but basically, what's been found is there are these different waves, and there are different rhythmic patterns that can be tracked reliably, emanating out of the nervous system and the cerebral spinal fluid. And so those waves have certain periodicity; they're rhythmic. And at the same time, if you look at those waves in comparison to the harmonic structure and the waveforms that are coming out of the earth, then what you can find is that there's actually a synchronicity or a harmonic regularity between what the Schumann resonance of the earth is and how our blood pressure and our arterial blood flow is being regulated through the Meyer wave, and then that cascades up through how the craniosacral system is being described in these different wavelengths and these different rhythms. So in a sense, what you could understand the Kundalini process as being related to is that when one becomes still in their mind, and that stillness synchronizes through their physiology and through a certain depth into their energy field, and that synchronicity, that multiple wave synchronicity, actually creates a point of coherence. And that coherent point then sets off a cascade that has both psychological and physiological effects. So Isaac Bentoff did a great amount of work on this, and you can reference his stuff. We'll put a link in the video about that. But it's an interesting model, and it doesn't really matter what it is that you emphasize. What certainly exists is there's many documented cases. I can vouch for it, as mentioned, that there is this process where there can be a kind of transformational aspect to the central channel, to the Kundalini, and in a sense, what it is it's a shift from the consciousness being able to perceive the physical body as is, to blurring the boundary between the body and the mind, and starting to have more and more transparency in the higher centers that are increasingly psychic, mental in nature. If you want to develop your Kundalini system in an integrated manner, then I'm going to provide 3 tips that I think are really important. Now, I'm a big proponent of an integrated approach to doing this kind of work. Now, that's not only because integrative approaches mean that you're including everything, the body and the mind, but also because Kundalini development's actually quite a, dare I say, perilous activity. And by that I mean it can go wrong. So there are a lot of people who've experienced what's known as Kundalini Syndrome. And essentially, imagine the Kundalini system as purely from an electrical circuit standpoint. And you know that if you've ever plugged a device into a wall socket and then that it fries the circuit of that object, the machinery that got fried potentially doesn't work anymore, or it's really glitchy. So essentially what can happen with Kundalini development is that it can prematurely awaken in somebody, and that actually if their system's not ready for the amount of electrical charge that moves through you as a result, then it can actually fry your circuit, and your circuit being your physiology, your nervous system, your endocrine system. Sometimes people have severe migraines for even as many as years. So it's important to take a very integrated approach to Kundalini development, and furthermore to keep in mind, you can't really command that the Kundalini awaken. The best thing to do is to do really good quality inner practice and do an integrated practice, and then the Kundalini will develop, open, and rise by itself. Now I'm going to give you 3 tips on how it is to progress your Kundalini system. And it's a short list, but these are what I think are the most central characteristics, the most central considerations if you want to move your Kundalini system along. So number 1 is get grounded. And that means feel the descending current moving through your body. So a lot of interest in Kundalini has to do with the ascendant current, about the high vibration, but the thing is to go up, one must come down if one wants a balanced practice. So that means build your physical vitality, clear out your lower centers as much as possible, particularly connect to your root chakra and also to your kidneys. So your kidneys are the organs that have the most relationship to the earth and to the function of grounding. And so from the meridian channels, your kidneys extend down through the center of the soles of the feet. So if you look into all those aspects, a really core feature of developing the Kundalini system would be get grounded. Okay, number 2, develop the breath. The breath is the bridge. The bridge to what? Well, the bridge between the body and the subtle bodies, between what seems physical and what seems energetic. So developing your breath is an extremely important aspect, because the breath opens up into the nervous system and connects directly into the quiet mind. So the yogic tradition has a lot of pranayama, a lot of breath work available. There's different forms of breath work from all different kinds of practices. So connect into whatever practice might work for you. But it's really important that you refine your breath, that you learn to open your breath such that you can start to connect into your nervous system because the nervous system becomes the physiological aspect that has to be able to attenuate to higher and higher frequency and to handle more and more charge. The nervous system is also the part of our physiology that kind of sections off the traumas that we've experienced, or sections off the stuff that we don't like to feel or to look at. So the breath, as a starting point, is a very, very good way to learn to access what it is that your body is kind of hiding from your conscious awareness. The third thing that I would say, and I want to say this, I don't know if this is avoidable, and that is develop a still mind. And I know of no better way to do this than through traditional meditation. And for me, I spent years, every single day, often for hours a day, doing single-pointed meditation. And that was just watching my breath at the tip of my nose. And that practice, and any practice which develops a silent mind, a quiet mind, and so that your observational presence, your witnessing capacity gets more and more strong, and that your ability to have what's regularly called continuity of awareness, meaning your consciousness and your awareness of the present moment are able to be more and more here continuously without discursive thinking, without getting distracted. Now, developing a silent mind is a very, very important practice, and I can't stress that enough. And it certainly is one of the preeminent features of developing one's Kundalini system. Thank you so much for listening to this talk. The Kundalini system is a really important aspect to the development of our consciousness and our energy system, and it's a really deep subject, and there's actually quite a bit of interest in it right now. So hopefully a lot of the things that have been covered over this talk have been useful to you. Please check out the Field Dynamics page. If you're into Kundalini development, Field Dynamics is presenting an energy healing modality and a model of working that can really help to move that along in an integrated and an intelligent fashion. So check out our page, see what events we're doing, subscribe to this page, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch.